Imagine standing in a place so profoundly quiet that you can actually hear the blood rushing through your own veins, the rhythmic scraping of your blinking eyelids, and the terrifying thump of your own heartbeat. You might think this absolute stillness would bring peace, but within minutes, a suffocating wave of panic begins to crawl up your spine, your chest tightens, your breathing grows shallow, and your mind starts screaming. Why does the human brain, which constantly begs for rest in our loud, modern world, violently rebel when it finally gets what it asked for? Why does your mind treat total silence not as a sanctuary, but as an immediate existential threat? The truth is, your brain does not just dislike silence, it is fundamentally terrified of it. And if left in a world without sound for too long, your own mind will gladly tear itself apart just to make a noise. 1. The real-world phenomenon and the brain's inability to cope with prolonged silence. For centuries, humanity has chased the illusion of quietness. We build thick walls, buy noise-canceling headphones, and dream of escaping to remote landscapes, believing that if we could just mute the chaos of the outside world, our minds would finally achieve a state of pure, undisturbed bliss. But this is one of the greatest cognitive illusions of the human experience. When people are actually dropped into environments of absolute, unyielding stillness, the reality is far from peaceful. It is deeply disturbing. Consider the modern phenomenon of acoustic engineering chambers, specifically anechoic chambers. These rooms are designed to absorb 99.99% of all external sound, creating a space of total auditory deprivation. Most people assume they could sit in such a room for hours, reading a book or relaxing. In reality, the world record for surviving inside one is barely under an hour. Within mere moments of entering, the silence stops being a lack of noise and becomes a physical heavy weight. You enter expecting calm, but what you receive is an immediate internal crisis. This happens because the human brain is not a passive collector of data. It is an aggressive, hyperactive prediction machine. From the moment you are born to the second you die, your brain is drowning in an ocean of continuous sensory inputs. It processes the low hum of the refrigerator, the distant rustle of wind, the muffled traffic, and the ambient murmurs of life. Your brain takes this constant background noise, filters it out of your conscious awareness, and uses it as a structural baseline. This baseline tells the brain one simple, vital truth. The world is functioning and you are currently safe. When you suddenly strip away this baseline, you are not giving the brain a break. You are removing the very foundation of its reality. The brain suddenly finds itself in an informational vacuum. It is like an engine running at full speed that suddenly loses its transmission. It spins out of control. The lack of external sound forces the brain to turn inward, and because it cannot process nothingness, it begins to amplify the only sounds left available, the internal mechanics of your own body. You begin to hear the wet, sliding sound of your joints moving. You hear the high-pitched metallic whine of your nervous system firing. The silence becomes deafeningly loud. This immediate cognitive shift proves a fundamental neurological truth. Your brain is simply not built to handle the void. It does not possess the structural capacity to exist in nothingness without breaking down. 2. The mechanism of biological programming and the threat signals hidden within stillness. To truly understand why the brain reacts so violently to a lack of sound, we must look backward, deep into our evolutionary past. Our modern brains are essentially ancient operating systems running on survival code that was written hundreds of thousands of years ago on the dangerous wild savannas. In that primal world, sensory perception was the only thin line dividing life from sudden brutal death, and in the language of nature, sound is life, while total silence is almost always a harbinger of doom. Throughout evolutionary history, a vibrant, noisy environment was a guaranteed indicator of safety. If the birds are chirping, the insects are buzzing, and the distant animals are moving naturally, it means there are no apex predators in the immediate vicinity. The ambient noise of nature acts as a biological green light, telling our ancestors that they can lower their guard, forage for food, or sleep. However, imagine a prehistoric hunter walking through a dense forest when suddenly every single bird stops singing. The insects go completely dead silent, the wind drops, and the entire ecosystem falls into an instantaneous absolute hush. To an ancient human, this sudden silence was the ultimate red alert. It meant a tiger was crouching in the bushes, or a violent storm was about to break. Silence meant that every living creature nearby had frozen in sheer terror, hiding from an imminent threat. Therefore, our brains evolved to interpret sudden or prolonged silence not as a moment of relaxation, but as a biological emergency signal. When you sit in a completely silent room today, your conscious mind knows you are safe inside your home. But your ancient subconscious brain does not care about your modern walls. It only recognizes the total lack of auditory data. The moment the environment goes quiet for too long, the brain automatically assumes that a predator is lurking just outside your field of vision. It immediately triggers the survival response, bypassing your logical thinking entirely. The Haikanyan, the brain's emotional alarm system, fires up and floods your bloodstream with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. Your heart rate elevates, your muscles tense up, and your eyes dart around the room. Your body enters a state of hypervigilance, an intense fight-or-flight mode. This is the profound paradox of human psychology. You seek silence to escape stress. But the evolutionary design of your biology transforms that very silence into the ultimate source of stress. Your brain is trapped in an ancient loop, forever wired to believe that when the world goes quiet, death is just a heartbeat away. 3. The rise of the default mode network and the mind's capacity for self-destruction. When external reality fades into absolute quiet, the brain undergoes a radical neurological shift. In the world of neuroscience, the brain is never truly at rest. When you are actively engaged in a task, like driving a car, solving a math problem, or reading a book, your brain utilizes specific networks dedicated to external focus. But the moment you are dropped into prolonged silence with no external stimuli to process, a massive interconnected web of brain regions takes over. This is known as the default mode network, or the DMN. The default mode network is essentially the brain's internal theater, and it is a dangerous place for an unsupervised mind to wander. When the outside world goes quiet, the DMN lights up like a neon city in the dark. Deprived of external sounds and data, the brain stops looking out and starts digging in. It begins a process called mental time travel. It drags you backward into the past, forcing you to reanalyze your deepest regrets, your ancient embarrassments, and your unresolved traumas. Then it hurls you forward into the future, constructing elaborate, terrifying worst-case scenarios about your career, your relationships, and your mortality. This is not a peaceful process of self-reflection. It is an aggressive automated defense mechanism. Because the brain is a problem-solving organ, when it is given zero real-world problems to solve due to the surrounding silence, it begins to manufacture artificial problems just to keep itself occupied. It takes minor social anxieties and inflates them into existential crises. It transforms a simple, unanswered text message from a friend into definitive proof that you are completely alone in the world. The psychological weight of this internal monologue is why solitary confinement is universally recognized as one of the most severe forms of psychological torture. When you lock a human being in a silent, featureless concrete box, you are not just separating them from society. You are stripping away their sensory anchor to reality. Without the stabilizing feedback loop of external noise and human interaction, the default mode network runs entirely unchecked. The mind begins to feed upon itself. Within days, the boundary between internal thoughts and external reality begins to blur, proving that the human ego cannot maintain its sanity when forced to mirror only its own echoing emptiness. 4. The brain's illusion-generating mechanism and the terrifying experiments in sensory isolation. What happens if you push this silence to its absolute legal and physical limit? If the brain hates silence because it craves information, what does it do when it realizes that no information is coming at all? The answer is as fascinating as it is terrifying. If the world will not provide a noise, the brain will violently hijack your consciousness and invent one. This is the psychological phenomenon known as sensory deprivation psychosis, or the Charles Bonnet syndrome of the senses. When the neural pathways that carry auditory and visual information into the brain go completely dark, the brain's sensory cortexes do not shut down. Instead, they do the exact opposite. They turn up their internal volume, increasing their neural sensitivity to an unprecedented level, searching desperately for even a fraction of a decibel of sound. When this hypersensitivity yields nothing but continued silence, the brain suffers a cognitive breakdown. It realizes it is starving for data. In an act of pure desperation to maintain its stability, the brain begins to misinterpret its own internal neural noise, the random background firing of its own brain cells, as external reality. It projects its internal thoughts outward, transforming your subconscious fears and memories into vivid, terrifying auditory and visual hallucinations. This was definitively proven in a series of famous psychological experiments conducted in the mid-20th century, most notably by researchers like Dr. Donald Hebb at McGill University. In these studies, healthy college students were placed in specialized sensory deprivation chambers. They wore translucent visors to block their vision, heavy cotton gloves, and cardboard cuffs to restrict their sense of touch, and they were submerged in absolute echoing silence. They were paid handsomely just to lie still in the quiet dark. The researchers expect the participants to use the time to rest or think deep thoughts. The reality was a psychological disaster. Within hours, the students became intensely anxious and emotionally volatile. They could not concentrate on any logical thoughts for more than a few minutes. Soon after the hallucinations began, subjects reported hearing phantom dogs barking, choirs singing in the distance, and mechanical motors roaring. Some saw complex visual arrays of marching squirrels or geometric patterns floating through the void. They lost all track of time and space. The experiment had to be prematurely aborted because the participants were suffering severe emotional trauma. They chose to walk away from easy money rather than spend another hour inside the silent vacuum of their own minds. This historical evidence leaves no room for doubt. Your brain demands input. It requires a constant chaotic symphony of noise to anchor it to sanity. If you deny your brain the music of the universe, it will gladly plunge you into a living nightmare of its own creation. 5. The fundamental need for safety and the healing power of background sound. The terrifying realities of sensory deprivation and the chaotic overdrive of the default mode network bring us to a critical realization. Our minds are inherently fragile structures that require constant environmental reassurance to stay grounded. The brain does not seek a state of absolute zero. It seeks a state of equilibrium, a delicate balance where it feels stimulated enough to remain stable, yet not so overwhelmed that it fractures under stress. This balance is achieved through what psychologists call an auditory anchor. When a small, gentle stream of sound is introduced into an environment, it works like a stabilizing anchor for a ship tossed in a stormy sea. This is the neurobiological reason why a low-volume background noise, whether it is the steady patter of rainfall, the rhythmic hum of a coffee shop, or the soft ambient frequencies of lo-fi music, can instantly induce a deep sense of focus and calm. These sounds do not distract us. Instead, They serve a vital protective function for our cognitive architecture. First, an auditory anchor effectively silences the alarm system of the evolutionary brain. By providing a continuous, non-threatening stream of auditory data, it signals to your ancient survival mechanisms that the immediate environment is secure. The birds are still singing in your modern savanna. The insects are still buzzing. Therefore, your cortisol levels drop, your heart rate stabilizes, and your body can finally step down from its hypervigilance. Second, a subtle background sound acts as a gentle constraint on the default mode network. It occupies just enough of the brain's sensory processing capacity to prevent the mind from drifting into the dark, toxic loops of self-doubt, past regrets, and manufactured future crises. It fills the dangerous informational void with a predictable, harmless pattern. In this state of safety, your prefrontal cortex, the seat of logic, creativity, and deep execution, can finally take the wheel. You are no longer wasting precious cognitive energy defending yourself against a phantom predator in a silent room. With your brain feeling structurally secure and emotionally safe, your focus sharpens, your anxiety melts away, and your creative potential is unlocked. True peace of mind, it turns out, is never found in the terrifying vacuum of absolute silence, but in the gentle, rhythmic cadence of a safe and familiar sound. The next time you find yourself trapped in an unexpectedly quiet room, feeling a sudden wave of unexplainable anxiety wash over you, remember this: you are not losing your mind. Your brain is simply trying to protect you from a prehistoric danger that no longer exists. Do not fight the void with your own chaotic thoughts, and do not let your mind feed upon its own emptiness. Instead, give your brain the simple reassurance it is begging for. Put on some low white noise, step outside to hear the wind, or let a soft ambient track fill the room. You don't need a silent world to find inner peace. You just need a mind that knows it is safe. If you have ever experienced that strange, suffocating feeling of anxiety in a completely silent room, drop a comment below and describe exactly what your mind started inventing to fill the void. Let us know how you escaped your own internal theater. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and step out of the shadows of your mind with Shadow Psychology DD. Stay curious, stay aware, and we will see you in the next dark chapter.